7 of our Series 7 exam overviews by Passing Score. In this video, we'll be going over two topics. Let's start with the more fun one, abuses. This gets into insider trading, interpositioning. Let's get started with market manipulation though. Market manipulation is any time you affect the market through unfair means like starting rumors or making trades just to affect the volume or manipulate the price of a stock. It's specifically prohibited under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, although there are several laws afterwards that are more specific about the violations and the penalties involved. Insider trading is any time someone has significant and material non-public information. You have to have two parts, significant and material non-public information. There are certain restrictions once you are designated as an insider. You have to report your status within 10 days, and there are restrictions on the trades you can make. First of all, you can't trade on that inside information, and you can't sell stock at a profit if you've owned it less than 6 months. Also, you can't give that information to another person to benefit from. That's called tipping and is also prohibited and illegal. Interpositioning is when broker-dealers are offering to trade for a client but add extra steps, either with another broker-dealer or someone else, that adds fees that are unnecessary for the client. There are times when additional services can add value or give some price advantage, but in the cases where it's just to raise fees and generate more income from the clients, that is strictly prohibited and is known as interpositioning. Commingling is where the broker-dealer is mixing their securities in with the clients. This is also prohibited under the 1934 Act. And the issue was that once you mix in the securities together, you can assign gains and losses between the clients and your own shares arbitrarily. So you can assign all the losses theoretically to your client holdings and keep the profits, the profitable trades, and say, well, those were the broker-dealer shares, those were my shares. So instead, they're kept segregated in order to avoid this issue. Withholding is where an IPO distribution is held back by the lead investment bank in order to make some kind of gains in the case of a hot issue. A hot issue is where an IPO rises significantly in price after the initial filing into the initial distribution into the market. The IPO distributor can hold back some shares and hand them off to preferred clients or associates or other people in order to keep the profits where they want it to be, rather than distributing the shares as much as they can out to the public, which is they're obligated to do. Trading pools are where a group of investors work together to manipulate a stock. They trade with each other to lower the price, raise the price, or just pump up the volume of a security in order to profit from that. That's similar to another type of manipulation called a matched order. This is where you're buying and selling the shares basically to yourself in order just to pump up the volume. This can affect the price and again is a kind of fraudulent message to the market as to what's going on, and of course is also prohibited. That's it for our abuses section. Let's move over to communications. So there's specific types of communications made to the public that are defined by FINRA and also have rules around them. Let's start with what's called retail communications. This is paper or electronic distribution made to 25 or more retail investors, or I should say more than 25 retail investors, during any 30-day period. That's defined as retail communications. A retail investor is anyone that's not an institutional investor. Communications can include TV, internet, reprints of third-party articles, and these days social media. So remember, if it's more than 25 retail investors in a 30-day period, that's a retail communication. Approvals have to be obtained for certain communications. Principals will do this, except for if the communication doesn't recommend any investments, doesn't promote the products or services of the firm, or it doesn't provide any financial advice. Any communications like that, let's say like a job ad for the firm, doesn't have to have approval by the principal. Approval must be obtained before the public release or the FINRA filing is made. Public appearances are where an employee of the firm goes out to a conference or makes an appearance on TV or radio to be interviewed, and is not considered retail communication and does not need to be approved by the principal or have a filing done with FINRA. FINRA filings do have to be made within 10 days of use regarding these specific securities, including derivatives and CMOs, or if the communication has to do with the investment analysis tools and the results of those analysis. Again, things that are about the operations of the firm, such as a recruitment ad or a press release, reprints of third-party ads, do not have to be filed with FINRA. Certain FINRA filings have to be made before they're used, in this case up to 10 days before they're used. And this involves, first of all, FINRA members in their first year. They're a little bit more restricted in what they can file. They're being watched much more closely, and we'll see another example of this a little bit later. Also, if the firm has been disciplined, they may be required to file all of their communications as well. Again, a little bit more restrictive communications. And also certain types of securities and companies have more restrictive, have to have their filings approved 10 days prior to use, or I should say filed 10 days prior to use. Research reports also have their own separate rules. These are written communications about making investment decisions and the supporting information about that, about equities. The research reports need to disclose if there's some kind of ownership by the firm or the analysts, according to these rules here. And the reason for this is to disclose any types of potential or conflicts of interest or bias that the research report might have about that security. If the firm or the analyst has a large holding in that firm, you would think that that might affect what their results about that, whether it's a buy or a sell on a firm will be. Compensation also has to be disclosed if the issuer, the subject of the research report, has made any compensation for underwriting within the last 12 months. That needs to be disclosed. And if there's been an IPO with that broker-dealer within the past 40 days or a secondary offering within the last 10 days, then no research report should be issued. And very importantly, the research department must be kept separate from the investment banking department, since there's room for bias and influence by one department on the other to affect the results of the research report. So remember, if there's any type of underwriting compensation within the last 12 months, that needs to be disclosed. 40 days for IPOs, 10 days for secondary offerings, no research report should be issued. There are retention requirements as well for all ads. They must be kept for 3 years, and 2 years must be readily available for a FINRA audit. Ads do not have to be filed with FINRA. In general, they just have to be retained, except for ads regarding these types of securities, options, CMOs, and investment companies. Those do have to be filed with FINRA. And again, broker-dealers in their first year have a little bit more restrictive rules. All of their ads must be filed with FINRA 10 days prior to their publication. Options ads are considered a little bit more risky and targeted for sophisticated investors, so those have more restrictive rules than other types of ads. Those have to be, options ads have to be approved, and any material submitted to an SRO 10 days prior to use. They also cannot make specific recommendations as well as other restrictions on what the ad can say. That's it for our communications section. If you have any questions, please